The Leafs cracked the top 10 in offseason power rankings, and should the league even out the no-tax state advantage? We'll discuss that and more on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leafs-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. What's going on, Dave? How you feeling on a Thursday?
Not too bad. It just seems a little bit of news coming down. The AHL is expanding its playoff format to 23 teams.
23 teams? The playoffs? 23 teams?
Mm-hmm.
So every team's going to be making the playoffs now, basically?
I don't like. I'm just checking. I'm just taking a look here. It's going to be for so.
It's not even an even number.
Well, apparently that's the same format they had last year.
Really?
I find that very odd.
So what? Last year they just gave it a go, and this year it's now full
Well,
go.
They're extending it for another year, according to Tony Andrikakis. I don't know how to pronounce this first. He's the Twitter handle, the X handle is Tony and Rock. Is the one that
breaking news. Breaking news right now is what you're telling me. Yeah.
It's just he's got the scoop. He's putting that out there, and yeah, I had no idea there was even 23.
Neither did I. I guess. We'll see what ends up happening. I guess that would mean that there's some buys in there. I guess is probably how that would have to work out if there's uneven teams.
We do know that the NHL likes to try things, and the AHL is usually a guinea pig for those things. So I'm wondering if the NHL would ever look at how this AHL playoff format is and consider its own playoff format.
Yeah, I mean, I think expanding from 16 to 23 seems a little rich. And look, Gary Bettman's always kind of been pretty staunch in his stance that he doesn't think they need to expand the playoffs, and that's not something that they're really looking to do. However, you know, with teams always popping up, and you've got, you know, 2 expansion clubs in the last couple of years, and we all know what type of revenue that the playoffs bring in. Maybe eventually, if they continue to add teams, and the thought is they do still want to add teams at some point, maybe not now, but in the next couple of years. You know, there was a possibility of them going back into the Phoenix area. We know that Kansas City was you know, apparently looking into a team. Houston was looking into wanting to expand and get a team. Maybe you get one back in Quebec City. Could Toronto have a second team at some point? You know, there's always these conversations, and yeah, I think if that were to occur and you end up adding an influx of teams, and all of a sudden, you know, you go from, you know, 36 years ago to all of a sudden, okay, now we got 36 teams. Okay, now I could possibly see them expanding the playoffs at that point. But as long as it still only remains at 32, I think the format's quite fine how it is. I think the amount of teams that make it is fine. Like, it's a 50-50 split. Half the teams make, half the teams miss. I think it's kind of it works out well that way. I wouldn't want them to make this tweak or expansion without bringing more teams in the league, and that's also something I'm not sure that, you know, I'm ready for quite yet.
Well, yeah, I don't think the NHL is really ready to add more teams yet. I do think there are markets that are pushing and would like to have that opportunity. Like, you look at Quebec, you brought up like Houston, and things like that. So I do think there'll be an appetite one day, but also it's just like the league is just getting its footing back when it comes to its business and actually, you know, seeing the salary cap increase. I think there's a lot more that I think just to make sure all the markets are, in a favorable position. Finally getting Arizona, well, not getting the Utah edition is going to be big. And now I don't know if you saw that Alex Meruelo is officially done with the NHL.
I did, yeah. Yesterday kind of came out that he relinquished his rights to the Phoenix Coyotes hockey club, Arizona Coyotes hockey team. So even if they do go back into Arizona, I don't think Morello has much of a say. So, or he'll have to reapply, I guess, to try and gain ownership back. But yeah, he gave it all up yesterday, and he's done with the NHL, and the NHL seems to be done with him, and peace. Good riddance. Don't not gonna miss you. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, Meruelo. Definitely don't do that. I mean, you heard some stories like just his time since he took over the team was just ridiculous. Like how they weren't paying their vendors, and people in the arena weren't getting paid. They got locked out of their building. Even before like the season ended, they got locked out, and then they like had to pay some money to get back in. And then they decided, okay, we're gonna now go and play at Mullet Arena. We're gonna play at the college rink because we're not wanted anymore inside Gila Arena rink, because we've been such
They,
terrible tenants. It's
they,
insane.
they left Shane Doan's jersey retirement banner at the other arena, and some fan was able to get it because I think it was like just tossed aside.
Yeah,
Like, what are we doing? Like, I don't know
outrageous.
How the NHL waited that long to give this guy every opportunity to keep Arizona. Like, I understand they want to keep Arizona hockey life. Just find somebody else. God,
Well, it doesn't seem like anyone else is really interested. You can't force a guy to sell his business too, right? Like they unfortunately, made the partnership years ago and signed off on the sale so that Morello would be the owner of the team, and I think he sold the bill of goods and was unable to kind of come through. He's I don't want to say a con man, but that's kind of how it worked out. He ended up making a lot of money off of this whole situation. And like he got paid over $1 billion from Ryan Smith to sell the team to him. It was wild. And he got a sweet discount when he bought it off of he bought it off the league, didn't he? Back in
yeah, it was like a couple 100
20,
million. Not
yeah,
even.
like sweetheart deal. He made a lot of money off of that whole thing. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of things that we could look at the NHL and think, well, could there be change here? Would this benefit the league perhaps? And that's something that we want to kind of get into a little bit today, because speaking of the Utah Hockey Club, I had a chance to actually speak yesterday on Overdrive with not only the GM of the Utah Hockey Club, Bill Armstrong, but also a chance to talk to Barry Trotz, the general manager of the Nashville Predators. And he had a very interesting comment about the advantage of being in a no tax state. When we come back, let's dive into that and whether or not the NHL should, would, will, won't look into possibly evening the playing field when it comes to that. And obviously, that means it would have to improve things for the Canadian clubs, including our beloved Toronto Maple Leafs. So we'll get into that conversation on the other side. It's Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the price you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you as we are each and every weekday here on the Locked On Leafs podcast. You can find it wherever you get your podcast at, whether that's iTunes, Spotify, wherever, and also up on YouTube. You can watch the video format of the show as well. We ask that you would subscribe if you would. We're on our road to 10K. Once we get to 10,000 followers, 10,000 subscribers on YouTube, we'll be giving away another Leafs jersey. So the quicker you get there, the quicker you get yourself a jersey. So we kind of were talking about, whether or not the NHL would make a change to the playoffs. And that's just based on the fact that the AHL seems to be trying things out here. Last year they had 23-team playoff, and this year they're looking to, continue to try the 23 playoff team format. So we talked about whether or not the NHL would, give that a go at some point or expand it in some form. Another thing that I'm wondering what the NHL, if they would consider making a change, and this is a conversation that's, been brought up before. But yesterday when I was on Overdrive, Dave, when we were talking with Barry Trotz and, asking him about, how much he enjoyed the offseason that he's had so far, landing Stamkos, landing Brady Shea, landing Jonathan Marchessault, and just asked him what it's like to now be the GM and have the final say. And, we were kind of getting into the conversation about, and he fully admitted that there's an obvious advantage to being in a no-tax state. Right. And when you look at what's going on around the NHL and you look at a lot of the teams in the last few years who've gone deep and that have gone into like the Final Four, the Stanley Cup Finals, we're seeing a lot of these no tax states show up there. Right. The Vegases, the Dallases, right. The Tampas, the Floridas, Nashville is another no tax state. And, you look at how they were able to win free agency. They brought in a lot of players. And I guarantee you, a lot of them look at the deals and they're like, I'll make a lot more money signing here for $8 million than I would if I came to Toronto, let's say. Like they poked in on Brady Shea. They asked about Brady Shea. And Brady Shea will make a lot more money making $7 million in Nashville than he would making $7 million annually in Toronto. So the question is, Dave, do you think we ever get to a point where the NHL kind of levels the playing field in that regard? And like, how would they even do that, you think?
Well, in my opinion, I don't know how they can really navigate that. I don't see like a fine line, like a fine way to do it. In my opinion, the best way to do it is not to have a hard salary cap in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Because then you can, if a team, I'm not even going to put Toronto in that one because this feels like it would always be a Toronto conversation. The Rangers are a team that would definitely like to spend more than the salary cap. So you'd have a luxury tax system similar to even like what they have in the NBA where you can exceed, but you got to pay for it. Right. I just feel like that's the best way for teams that, what, we feel like we can do a lot better if we just had a little bit more of an opportunity to compete with some of these other states. And I understand that some people will say that that's not an advantage. It's hard to argue when you look at where players want to go and some of the reasons behind it. Obviously, they're decent places to play. Florida, there's a good lifestyle there. Nashville, pretty decent lifestyle there. But the tax stuff, a lot of players think about that now. A lot of agents also, I think, kind of think about that. I know that some agents say, well, there's ways if you got a good accountant, they can help navigate some tax stuff. Well, just go look at what John Tavares is dealing with. I don't know if it's as simple as some agents make it out to be. Especially when you're dealing with the Canadian government and how they regulate things. So,
yeah.
Like if just not even to deal with that headache in the first place, right? And so I do think that there is something to be said, especially for the NHL where money is just so tight, right? You don't hear it too much in the other sports because they don't have, like MLB, you don't hear about that. NBA, you definitely don't hear about that. NFL, it's a little different just because there's a
Non-guaranteed
different.
contracts.
Yeah, right. Like if you sign a bad deal, you can just cut the guy, and you only have to deal with maybe, well, depending on how how bad of a contract you sign, it's a little different. But yeah, like you can get out of contracts in the NFL a lot easier. So I think people don't understand really how tough the hard cap system, and then these teams that do have that advantage just are able to make things a little bit tougher for those who are not able to do it. Like you look at the Canadian teams, especially, they're the ones I think that always suffer the most
Oh, for
because they
sure.
always have the hardest time attracting free agents. Now, part of that has to do with it's harder to play in the Canadian market. I agree with that. Canadian markets are not the easiest in terms of how players are perceived and things like that, and the pressure that's put on them. At the same time, you do on the Canadian market, you're going to be a god forever in a lot of ways.
Yes,
Especially,
they are looked upon as gods, as Mitch Marner says. It is
glad
true.
you picked up on that. So I do think that the NHL will continue to deny it because, I mean, of course, they're not going to say that a team's got a competitive advantage, but it's been talked about enough, and I don't think it's. I think the last few years with the Florida teams being in the last how many Cup finals?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I guess, right? Because Tampa went to 3 straight, and now you got Florida going
Florida
2
2
straight.
straight. Vegas
Dallas,
was in one of them.
Vegas was
Was
in
in one.
1. Dallas was in 1. Is Colorado no tax state?
I
Income
don't
tax?
think I don't think Denver is.
Maybe not Denver, but yeah, I mean, you've got a lot of teams out there that definitely use that to their advantage, and I mean, I would too. Realistically, I don't blame them for that, like absolutely, but there's a reason why the Florida Panthers were able to sign Sam Reinhart to an $8.5 million AAV contract because that 8.5 million goes further in his bank account and in his pocket, right? Than if he were to try and sign, that $8.5 million deal in Toronto, let's say. Like it goes farther. It really, really does. And it's a big reason as to why, Tampa was able to lock up their core and get those sweetheart deals, why Stamkos played for an $8 million contract and why Hedman was playing for an $8 million contract for years, Vasilevsky under 10. Like these players, these stars, superstars of the league for years were playing on these lower end deals, and Toronto kept having to pay their superstars top dollar because they, in order for them to be making X amount of money in their bank, they had to be paid accordingly. And yeah, I'm not sure if there's a fix. Obviously, right now, there isn't. No one's thought of one because I know the NHL probably would prefer to even it out if possible. But how do you do that? I don't know. Like even like how do you work out trades in that regard too? Where it's like, okay, now you're going to be paid this much, but if you get traded to Toronto, you're actually going to be paid this much, or vice versa. You're going to be paid that much now. And it's just it would be so complicated. It really wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to be able to just have a flat, hey, this is what the salary cap is going to be for this team and that team and this team. It just wouldn't, it would make trading so hard. It's so difficult. I just don't see it happening, Dave. But if they can somehow find another way, maybe, but maybe it is what you mentioned, the luxury tax system. If you want to go, say 10% over the cap, and you're willing to pay double into the league to do so, fantastic, great. But yeah, I we'll see. We'll see if anything comes of it, but I doubt we see a change anytime soon. That's for sure. All right. Speaking of change, there were plenty of changes over the course of the off season. Lots of teams making some drastic moves to improve their clubs, including the Toronto Maple Leafs. A revamped blue line. They've got a new goaltender in the mix there, along with Joseph Wall. Where does that land them in the NHL and athletic power rankings to start the season. We'll discuss that on the other side. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Price on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from receipt, and the lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. They've got last-minute deals where you can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sporting events, concerts, theater, comedies, whatever event you want to go to in your city. They've got flash deals. They've got zone deals, all in pricing and the lowest price guarantee. Or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you as we are each and every day. Let's pour one out also for Cap Friendly. Finally left us. I saw it yesterday. Yeah, yesterday saw it officially went offline as the sale, I guess, officially went through. And it was like 12:01 a.m. yesterday. Got a notification. Thank you for all your years of supporting Cap Friendly. We're done. And it's all she wrote. So RIP to Cap Friendly. Appreciate everybody who, helped make that site run. Good luck to all those who are, joining the Washington Capitals organization. Congratulations, I guess, as well. And best of luck to Puckpedia, who is now, I guess, the top source when it comes to, the NHL cap findings and all that good stuff that we spend hours looking on these websites. So hopefully Puckpedia, now that they're going to be getting all the traffic, they can kind of start improving their site and, become just as good as Cap Friendly. Hopefully that's the plan. All right. So we were taking a look in the Athletic and we noticed that there was a piece written by Dom Decision talking about the Maple Leafs and, well, she was talking about all 32 teams and pretty much it was like a power ranking, which teams improved the most throughout the offseason. He ranked all 32 teams in terms of, I'm assuming, so it's like how many points, his model, because he's got his own model where he has points. So is it like at the end of the year or at the beginning of free agency, how many points the model had? And then at the end, is that how he...
So basically, it looked at where the team was to start the offseason. It weighed the additions and subtractions, and and through that model, it gave it a plus or a minus rating to each team.
All right. So basically, yeah, like we took the roster at the end of the season, and then subtracted the guys who left, added the guys who they signed, and then where did it all land, I suppose. And Dom Decision ranked the Toronto Maple Leafs 8th, so the 8th most improved team in the league. He was very bullish on the blue line additions that Dom Decision made. So net rating of plus 14, apparently, according to Dom Decision. So the key additions, obviously, we'll go over them again. Chris Tanev, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and Anthony Stolarz. Notice how he does not have Yanni Hakanpää in there quite yet, although his Hakanpää key addition, I guess that's splitting hairs to having that conversation. Key departures were Tyler Bertuzzi, Joel Edmondson, Ilya Lyubushkin, and Ilya Samsonov. So in his mind, the additions that were made definitely makes this team better. And it was mainly just because he's a fan of what they did on the blue line with the Chris Tanev and Oliver Ekman-Larsson addition. And, in his mind, that makes them a much better team, turning those two. Like basically you turn Edmondson and Lyubushkin into Tanev and OEL. I think that is a lot better at the end of the day.
Yeah, and the big thing too is why Dom was a fan, and he said right to here is, you look at the league's top contenders that the Leafs go against each year. They didn't really make as many improvements as kind of the Leafs did. Like they didn't tinker, or some teams don't. Not every team needs to go out and make big additions, but he said like compared to what the Leafs did, the Leafs came out in a better spot. Like I'll tell you, the team that got the worst rating out of all the teams in the NHL were the Winnipeg Jets.
Yeah, they didn't really do anything.
Yeah, their key addition for him was Kaapo Kähkönen, and their departures were Toffoli, Monahan, Dillon, Schmidt, and Brossoit.
Yeah, that's taken a good chunk of your team away.
And even Vegas. Vegas was another one. They added, Alexander Holtz, Victor Olofsson, and Neil Samson, but they lost Marchessault, Mantha, Stevenson, Carrier, Amadio, Logan Thompson. Like it's the weight of your additions. Yeah, you can make additions, but how many are you subtracting? So even like Dallas, given what they lost Tanev, Pavelski, Suter, Hakanpää. It's funny, he puts Hakanpää as a key departure. It's like, well, where's he departing to, Dom?
Well, I mean, he is a departure technically, even if he retires or whatever. But yeah.
So essentially, it's just looking at what these teams lost and what they added, and like what the Leafs lost this offseason. Yeah, they did lose a Tyler Bertuzzi. That's a tough subtraction. But then you look at, as we said, we looked at the additions they made, like they're better than what they lost. Right. And I think that's why I'm like, I know people are not happy with the way this offseason may have gone, but it's the Leafs clearly wanted to make the blue line the priority.
Yeah.
That was always going to be the priority, and they did it.
Yes.
Right? This is probably the most meaningful change to this blue line in a really long time.
This is what I love about the conversation too, and it's funny because I told him this to his face, but I was listening to James Myrtle and Jonas Siegel and the Leaf Report a couple weeks ago, it was probably last week, and they were talking about they need to find a way to replace Tyler Bertuzzi's goals, and now they need a forward, and they would have preferred if maybe instead of getting OEL and Hakanpää, did they spend that money up front on another forward? And I sit back and I just kind of laugh, because for years we've been talking about how they spend so much money on forwards and not enough money on the blue line, and then they finally do that, and they go and they buy Tanev, and they go and they get Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and they get possibly Hakanpää. And now all of a sudden it's like, well, they should have put money towards a forward. I'm not sure. I think they did the right move there. It's like, what are we talking about? They told us that they were allocating money from the forward position to the blue line, and that was kind of going to be the MO of the off season of the summer. And they did that, right? They took the money that Bertuzzi was making essentially, and they gave it to Tanev. And some of it's obviously going to sprinkle over into OEL as well, right? Like that, we knew they were doing that. They told us that was going to be the game plan. So I don't know why so many people were so floored or shocked that the Maple Leafs didn't really add much offense this offseason. And you could look back and look at the playoffs, and it's like, well, offense was the problem. It's always been the problem. Offense is not the problem. Getting the big boys to score has been the problem, and those guys are still around, right? So this team's not going anywhere anyways unless those guys score. So to me, adding offense wasn't necessarily imperative, but getting offense from the guys who are still here is going to be most imperative moving forward for this team to have success. But they definitely equipped themselves defensively a lot better, and guys who fit what Greg Berube wants to do here, I think. So, yeah, I would probably put them certainly in the top 10 for teams that had the most improvement. I guess we're talking like winners and losers of the offseason so far. The Leafs, 8th place winner, I guess. That does make some sense there. Are there still holes? Yes. Did they get the top tier free agent like the Nashville Predators did? Like, no. So 8th place makes sense. I think I did also see NHL.com did their power ranking, post free agency power ranking, and they also had the Maple Leafs in the top 10, sitting at number 9 to start the season, or their first offseason power ranking, I guess. So again, the Maple Leafs, are they the top team in the league right now? No, I don't think they are. But are they a top 10 team? Yeah, I think that makes sense. Hovering in that 8-9 hole makes a lot of sense for the Maple Leafs, So, I think the Maple Leafs did some good things this summer, and I'm quite excited to see how it all kind of plays out, how it shakes out, how the lineup kind of gets configured, how Berube goes about deploying things. Like we saw a lot of tinkering with Sheldon Keefe. He was someone who he loved a good tinker, didn't he? A little mid game
The
shuffle.
Keefe blender. The Keefe blender.
Oh man, he loved it. He was hot and horny for a good tinker. I don't know if we'll see that as much with Craig Berube. You know what I mean? So I'm quite fascinated to see how this season kind of plays out with the rather decently sized changes. The biggest change we've seen in the last few years, I guess you could say, to this roster with a blue line reconstruction and a completely new coaching staff as well. Should make for an intriguing training camp and first couple of months of the Maple Leaf season.
Oh, absolutely. I think people don't tend to also overlook the changes to the coaching staff, especially. I'm very intrigued to see how Mark Savard, because Mark Savard, I'm sure, has watched a lot of Leafs, especially when he was an analyst now a few years ago. I'm sure he would love to work with some of these guys and really try to bring something out that maybe others haven't really been able to in the past. So that's something I'm curious to see. And look, when it comes to the forwards and trying to add scoring, there is something called the trade deadline.
Yeah,
if you really need to add a scorer, it's usually your best way to do it is to go and do it at the trade deadline.
Yeah, yep, totally true. And they're banking on internal improvement. They're banking on maybe Nick Robertson, if he sticks around, turning into a 20, 25 goal scorer. I mean, Bertuzzi scored 20 goals last year. It gets not impossible to replace. You get a little bit more offense, a full season out of Bobby McMahon. He could cut into some of that goal scoring. Nick Robertson could probably cut into that goal scoring. Does Easton Cowan make the team? Does he add some offense? Matthew Nyes, I think he only had like 14 goals himself. Does he add some more offense to his game this year? Domi only had 9 goals. You would expect for that to maybe take a bit of an uptick. Can he get 15, 16 goals? So I don't think it's that difficult to replace Bertuzzi's 20 goals from within. Now you're going to see a regression from Matthews, I would imagine. 69, I don't think is going to be the bar. Certainly that might be the goal, but it's going to be a tough one to get to. But overall, I would think the Maple Leafs end up actually scoring more goals next season than last with the team that they've put together, and assuming a bit of a bounce back for some guys. All right, buddy. We'll leave it there. I think the Marner's charity starts tonight, so maybe there'll be some audio for us to talk about tomorrow. See what happens with the yes. Let's pray. Some news, some content for us for the Maple Leafs. So if anyone's going out, enjoy, have fun, good luck. Raise as much money as you possibly can for the Marner Assist Foundation. Always a big proponent in the charities. But that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all podcast platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on X at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti, and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.